and it's no good, she says. And I'm like, it's no good. I said, this painting is 102 square feet in size. It's 7 by 15 feet. You have seen a 4 by 6 inch photograph of it on a computer screen, and you're telling me it's no good? You haven't even seen. How can you try to render a critique of a piece of a work of art of that scale by looking at a tiny image? It was, and she's now way up here, but this is how this conversation ended. She's like, I'm the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Your application will go no further. You can appeal it all you want. Click.
So my guest today is Julian Raven, and Julian, you got a unique story. I don't know your story 100%, just outside of a little, digging before we do the show, a little initial research. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your story, and we'll start with you wrote a book, and we'll start with the title of that book, what that book's about, and how you came to write that book.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me on, Ricky, and it's good to be with you today. To start with, as you mentioned before about finding common ground, I put the picture behind me of the Smoky Mountains because I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I had it is in my book. I do write about it because I was traveling RVing with my wife for a couple of years, and we were in the Smoky Mountains, and it was part of my journey towards healing on the sort of backside of this journey that I've been on. And the Smoky Mountains was one of the most revelatory places, magnificent places. As you said, one of the most visited places as far as national parks are in the United States. But for me, it was more than that. It was remarkable, the beauty and majesty and pristine crystal waters. It was winter time
Yes.
when we were there, or late winter coming into the spring, and the waters were crystal clear and cold as ice and rushing. And it was that rushed over my soul and was a major part of a journey towards healing on the backside of what I'd been through. So I just wanted to put that there to get going as far as common ground. I heard your love for the Smoky Mountains, so I thought, wow, isn't that great?
Yes, yes. Man, the Smoky Mountains, the way you describe that is kind of how I felt when I first caught there. And then my love grew and grew to what it is now. And eventually I hope to retire there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, we camped on Cherokee land in a Cherokee campsite, and it was that whole story, the Trail of Tears, which is a major theme of that region, tragic, devastating. Again, I wrote about that in my journey, just as far as the sort of impact that had in my life, just knowing that story. And then knowing my story, when you go through the type of abuse of power, the experience of that, like I've been through, my experience, is relative to that of a people group who was rounded up and sent off across the country to walk to basically their next home thousands of miles away and just drop like flies in the desert. I mean, just the tragedy, it gives perspective to your own suffering, but suffering again is real for the person no matter what. It might not have been wounds physically or that I received, but it was real, and I'm still in that process. So that's where I'll get to. But as far as the book, and I'll just put it up here, it's called Odious and Cerberus: An American Immigrant's Odyssey and His Free Speech, Legal War Against Smithsonian Corruption. Now, my book is a mouthful, and it causes most people immediately to be like, "Oh my goodness!" Most when I edited it, the title was an issue because it's like, "Oh my goodness, this title!" Because most people want you to have a winning title, and I said, "Yeah, but the complexity of the title is a symbolic representation of the complexity of the fight and this issue that I'm in, this ball of fishing string that I'm tangled up in, is revealed in that title. And then on top of it, the title is sort of it's a code that has to be cracked by reading the book, because why odious and why Cerberus? And the answer to those questions are in the book. I didn't come up with the title. And when you realize where it comes from, it makes you go like this.
Ah,
So
yes.
yeah. And so I was like, you know what? I at times I considered retitling the book to help people, because to be honest with you, Ricky, I've had a lot of interviews. This has been going on for years. And every time since the book came out 2022, every journalist, every interview, they could not get this title down. Maybe one or two practiced it beforehand. So it is a mouthful, but it is,
Yeah,
like I
if
said,
you
it's
notice, if you caught that, I kind of wanted you to say it. So
because of that. And it's odious, and Cerberus is the abridged title right there. And I am working right now on the second edition due to the remarkable events of the last month that's taken place in Washington, D.C., surrounding my story and my book. It's incredible. So that's why, once again, I'm pushing with my book. I restarted my podcast and wanting to come and then obviously be a guest and share my story. And I resolved, probably it might have been 2021, when we started our road trip, my wife and I, after COVID. I was like, you know what, I've got to take my story on the road and go man to man, woman, man to woman, go person to person in this United States and tell people the story personally, so they can understand, because it is such a story that I've had now so many years with it, that when you begin to talk about it with most people, immediately all these shields come up, because the Smithsonian Institution holds this very guarded, sacred status in the minds and hearts of American citizens. Americans have been taken to Washington, D.C. since childhood and sort of escorted through the Smithsonian Institution on sort of like a pilgrimage. And it becomes this very highly respected, and it's a wonderful institution as a museum and history. It's what, and they have a respect and an awe, similarly to, as myself being a Brit formerly, the royal family in England, similarly to the Catholic Church's grip on the heart of Spaniards in Spain, where I grew up. And so it has this pseudo religious, mystical control over minds and hearts of people, that when I would come and begin to talk about it, it's immediately like, hold on, you're touching this sacred cow here. And
right.
I have had people, Ricky, to my face, like in full voice, how dare you sue the Smithsonian? I mean, indignant that I would dare sue this. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, it's about free speech. You should be happy. It's such a bizarre journey I have been on. It's such a bizarre journey.
It sounds that way. And so, briefly, like, so how did you come to sue the Smithsonian? Let's talk about that a little bit, because let's start with the beginning. You had a piece of artwork, right? That you wanted to place in the Smithsonian. Is that how this whole thing started, or?
Well, the painting, and it was an inspired painting of then candidate Donald Trump. I'm a New Yorker. He showed interest in running for governor 2014. Most of us here in upstate New York were like, great, a little bit of sanity maybe to the the politics of New York State, which is crazy. So we were encouraged by that. I always had like a positive view of the man as someone, as a straight shooter, a tough talker. So I said, this is what we need, a businessman who's got some business savvy. Maybe that can help the state, stem the hemorrhaging as far as all the businesses that exodus the state every year because of the policies and the taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So Trump for me was always living near New York City. I live upstate now, about 200 miles north of New York City, in a town called Elmira, made famous by Mark Twain. It was his home. And so I'm about 400 yards from Mark Twain's study, where he sat and wrote many of his books. And so it's, as an author, it's great to have the proximity to that type of, literary history, which is wonderful.
Yes, I'm
But,
very familiar with Mark Twain. I live in Missouri. So,
okay.
yes.
That's the second life then, because he
Yes.
had, his birthplace, and then obviously this was not his birthplace, but it was where he resided.
Right.
And so But Trump living in New York City, his name was everywhere. You could be driving down the West Side Highway and there's a sign on the side of the road and it says, "This next mile of road was cleaned by Donald Trump." And then the next mile down, there's a massive sign, gold glitz. "This is Trump. This and Trump." So it's, to me, I was like, this guy's a bold, in your face character. I love that, larger than life.
Yes.
So
Yes.
2015 rolls around after he was sort of kicked off to the curb by the Republican Party in New York State because he didn't qualify. They didn't want him. He had too much, it was a checkered past. And then 2015 rolls around when he comes down the escalator. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. That's going to shake up the mix. Whether it's real or not, who knows? So the book is very detailed in this experience that I had. I had a inspirational experience. I knew Trump was going to become president. This is the summer of 2015. This is when most people that I knew in the circle of friends that I had, whether they were conservative or Christian or both and politically active, they all had this very negative view of the man. One guy said to me, "Oh, I'd have to hold my nose to vote for this guy," and this type of thing. So I spent 2 months painting this inspired, massive 7 by 15 foot painting. I was consumed under this inspiration. It was a remarkable experience just to be in that mode for so long, and so it was life-changing. I go on a journey. I'm a newborn American citizen. I become a citizen on September 17th, 2015, on Constitution Day. I had my swearing in ceremony. So I'm in the midst of painting this painting, right at the end of it, and I become a citizen. And I go to Brockport, New York, and I pledge allegiance to the Constitution, to defend it, and swear an oath to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I renounce where I came from. It's a very dramatic thing. And so listen, I love this country. I fell in love with America, deeply in love with this country. And it's the ideas and the laws and this body of history that we have that makes it so special. It's not what America is today. This is an aberration as far as I'm concerned. But what the vision and the dream is something so special in this world. So I go on this journey with my painting. I travel across the country. I campaign for them. I do a grassroots campaign. I was number one in Iowa when the caucuses started. When it all started, I was there on the ground with my painting. I traveled around Iowa. I did like thousands of miles with this painting and showing it. And it was great American story as a foreigner, as a former Brit and a young man who grew up in Spain. It was a fabulous story. So I have this wonderful experience. Then I get a call by a guy by the name of Yossi Sergent. He was the patron and the inspiration behind the Obama Hope portrait poster of the 2008 campaign. If you remember that image, very famous, iconic image.
Yes,
well, this guy was the inspiration and the paint and the portrait. Shepard Fairey, who's the artist, he was some kid artist in the back streets of LA doing graffiti on walls, who Yossi Sergent meets at an art festival and says, "Hey, I got this idea." He was Sergent is a confessed hardcore leftist activist. Great guy. I met him when he invited me out to the show, but he then commissions Fairey with $100 to make a picture of this idea that he had of this hope post. And it was basically a photograph on the internet. It was photoshopped, and that became what it became. And it became like that because of the work of Yossi Sergent, not Shepard Fairey. Shepard Fairey was this unknown kid artist on the back streets of LA. It was the genius of this political activist who took the image and went across the country to every college campus and he posted that thing, and that thing became what it became. Well, he calls me up and he's like, "This is Yossi Sergent." And I was like, "Wow, that's interesting." He says, I'm curating the art of politics in Pasadena, California at the Politicon 2016 event, a big political conference. It's also sort of like a Comic-Con, but with politics. And he says, "I want your painting in my show." And I was like, wow. I was like, this was a big deal for me. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I have a huge painting. And so I was like, well, so what does this mean? He says, "Well, we're going to ship it across the country." And, and I was like, man, they're going to give me the white glove treatment. I mean, my painting, this massive painting, Then he couldn't stand the man. He was like, "This is, don't get me wrong." He says, "I can't say." He says, "But your painting is a vision of hope," and he says, "I wanted it in my show." And it was the art of politics that had the top political artists of the entire United States all on display. Even the Obama Hope poster was there. It was like, on the other side, like adjacent to mine. It's a remarkable thing for me as an artist. It was like, what a breakthrough, what a gig. This is huge. Well, anyway, that whole story is in the book, and it's a dramatic story in itself because they end up botching the whole thing. It was the weirdest thing, Ricky, was every time he talked about shipping it to LA, I said, "Listen, you need to understand something about my painting. It's 8 by 16 foot in the crate, and it's 12 inches wide or deep. It's 8 foot tall, and it's 16 feet long, and it weighs 800 pounds. That's how much this crate weighs. That's it. Yeah, it's a massive crate of plywood with like 10 sheets of plywood, 50 pounds. It's massive, 800. And he said, "Oh, no problem. We ship art all over the country and all this." Well, anyway, it was a disaster what they did. They didn't properly vet the company. And when it came to shipping the painting, the morning of, they call me up as the truck is on its way to pick it up. And they call me up and say, "We've canceled the painting. They want to charge an extra $5,000 to ship it to LA, and we don't have the budget for it. Sorry, click." And and I was like, devastated. I was like, this is some of the disappointment. I was like, no way. Well, I'm not the type of person to take that type of a no. So I unpacked the painting out of its crate. I rent a truck. I call up a buddy who's always wanted to drive across the country. I said, "I'm driving to LA. You want to come? You'll be here in about 2 hours or 3, and I'm leaving." He did. He drove up here, and we drove to Los Angeles. We only had like 4 days to get there before the show. We drove in 2 days and 9 hours, morning, noon, and night, to drive from New York to LA. Got the painting in the show. It was a huge, huge thing. So that's a sort of like a good picture of the exposure that the painting had, the significance in the art world, and part of the journey. Then it was at the RNC, not the entire painting, but it appeared a photograph on the screen. I was an alternate delegate in Cleveland, Ohio. A remarkable journey again for the young patriot citizen who's brand new, newborn citizen going and all this. Yes. I was sitting at the front row of the Republican National Convention, on the very front row, because New York State was the home state of Trump. So they had the priority seating in the conference. I was the alternate delegate. So I sat, when they called me, they said, "Oh, we're going to take a break. You come and sit for us." And I put me in I was like a spare tire. They put me in, and once they were done, they're like, "Get out of here. I'm the real delegate. Go back to your seat in the bleachers." And so they'd send me, but I didn't care. I was this guy from, I came from Marbella, Spain, a little fishing port. And here I am sitting on not just the front row, and there's the podium. It was epic. So again, a lot of stories like this in the book of the journey of a new American citizen, this political journey, a wonderful adventure. So why I'm sharing that is sort of the background, and there was a lot more to it. Those were some of the highlights. That then, after traveling the country, after Trump won, and I wasn't surprised, I was sort of like, well, what do I do now? I was like, it's quite a downer. I was like sitting around for like a week, in November. What do I do? And I prayed. I said, "God, what do I do with this painting? I did so much, and now he won." And the Smithsonian Institution. And the only reason why I thought of that and reminded was because across the country, I would meet people who would say to me in LA and in Iowa, they said, "This needs to be in the Smithsonian." And I was like, I don't even know what that is, because I'm a newborn citizen. I've heard of this name Smithsonian in Washington as spaceships and rockets. That's what this was, so I had no idea. And so I'd be like, all right, well, Smithsonian. So when they said that, I said, "Oh, Smithsonian Institution, I should apply with the painting." So I start researching. Right. I find the National Portrait Gallery, which is a museum part of the Smithsonian Institution. I like, this is great. And then I start Googling. And then I find, oh my goodness, they showed the Obama Hope portrait 2009 and 2013. They displayed the political campaign portrait of Barack Obama for the inauguration celebrations on January the 20th, 2009, 2000. I was like, yippee, is they going to show my painting? It's the only painting. It's the first painting. It's the most recognized painting. This painting, I went to all the politicians that I'd met and had campaigned and been, they all wrote glowing letters of recommendation, all New York State senators and congressmen and the mayor of my town and the RNC chair of New York State. I mean, all these bigwigs, all these political bigwigs, some art collectors, and radio hosts. This was a publicly supported application. This is a great thing as a tribute to this remarkable story of this non-politician. And here's the artwork. You showed the Obama painting. Here's this painting. And I submitted this big, fat package, Ricky. I guess what? I was like, well, no, because this is before I get to this. What happened was just I emailed it to Kim Sayet, the director. I got her email online. I emailed directly to her. And the next morning, I'm sort of a forthright person. I'm like, I could get on the phone and call them up and say, hello, this is me. I sent you the application. Anything I could do, anything missing. I speak to the secretary and she's like, well, we don't know right now. I'll let the director know you called and we'll get back to you. That type of sort of, cool reception. I was like, all right. 15 minutes later, this, Ricky, is when the story started. I'm in my basement office in upstate New York, out in the woods. We lived in the country, out in the woods in Elmira, New York. And there I am in my little basement and my phone rings and I look at the phone and it's a 202 number coming in from Washington, D.C. And I'm like, and I answer it and I put it to my ear and it's an Australian woman. And I'm like, this is Kim Sayet, the director of the National Portrait. She's Australian. She's talking this Australian accent. I was like, what in the world? And very snooty, very sort of, oh, you're the guy that sort of gave the painting with the eagle and the flag, like very denigrating. Immediately the tone was, and I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, it's too big, she says. And I'm like, too big? I said, well, do you have standards of portraiture size and acceptance? Are there anything like? She's making it up. She starts making this thing up. And I'm like, there's no standard for size, right? And she's like, well, then she says, it's too pro-Trump. And I'm like, too pro-Trump? I said, yeah, how could a portrait not be pro the person? I mean, that's what a portrait is. It's like pro the person, this is, so I'm refuting her. And then she says this to me, she says, it's not from life. And I was like, not from life. I said, and this is what she didn't know. Maybe she didn't read the application properly. The Obama portrait of Shepard Fairey that was shown, it's 2013 to 2000, that was a photoshopped photo from the internet. It wasn't even a painting. It was just a photoshopped picture, that photograph of Manny Friedman, an AP photographer who actually sued Shepard Fairey for copyright violation. Shepard Fairey was actually convicted because he destroyed all the evidence and he had to serve 6 months community service for his lies about using this guy's copyrighted image to do. All this crock is behind this image. Regardless of that, I said to her, that Shepard Fairey painting, that was a Photoshop. Oh, no, it wasn't. She shoots back and now she starts lying and her voice goes up 2 or 3 octaves and she's now pushing and lying and I'm challenging, I'm calling her out now. And this is the conversation, which is already getting intense, goes off the rails and becomes a full-blown argument. And don't forget, this is the National Portrait Gallery director who called me. I was not expecting her to call. I was expecting, if anything, the secretary to say, well, Mr. Raven, this is, well, thank you. This is what we'd like you to do, or blah, blah, something like nothing. This woman calls, and this is on the heels of the election win. And remember, people were losing their minds who had lost. The left they lost their minds. And so suddenly I'm aware that this person is one of these people. And she's just laying down these arbitrary objections. So I refute the from life issue. When you say a portrait's not from life, it means that you have to sit with the live person in front of you and you paint the person directly from life. That's a live portrait. It was nonsense what she was saying. I proved it was nonsense, so she jumps to the next. It's too political. And I'm like, too political. I said, how could the Shepard Ferry poster be shown, which was the political campaign poster for Barack Obama? You showed it twice, and you're saying mine's too political. Why? Because it has an American flag and an American eagle. This is too political for this woman. These people despise the
Yes.
symbolism that I had just sworn and pledged my allegiance to. And
And
I'm
it's
talking
even
to,
worse than that. It's like they, man, I'm with you. I cannot stand. I'm a patriot, man. I'm one of those type of, I don't like everything that my government does,
mm,
but I'm not my government. We are not our government.
mhm.
We are Americans, and you're included in that now. You are a citizen yourself, and it's, for me, it's an anti-American sentiment that these
It
people are
is.
perpetrating. And
Yep.
I like and we'll get into this a little bit later because I have plans to ask you about the mayor of New York City, the incumbent
Mm.
mayor of New York City. Um it's anti-American. It's it goes flies in the face of everything that we've stood for the last 250 years. And freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, this is all included in our founding ways. It was a guaranteed right for citizens to have freedom of speech, and now they want to twist it around to fit their agendas. No,
That's it.
I don't like that. I Freedom of speech should apply for everything. And because it doesn't, it especially applies to our government. Your
Well,
government
yeah,
cannot, yeah, your
yeah.
government cannot come over after you for something that you say.
Well, this becomes the big issue. And before I dive into that being the legal issue, the big legal issue, this is how that conversation with Say It ended. So she objects to pro Trump, to political, not from life, too big. And then she's like, after again, I refuted it. She knows that, artists, when we go to a gallery, it's always very tough. You get rejected. It's like, it's life. I just, it's a tough, but she knew that. And she's like, oh, I know how hard it is when you get rejected. It's like she was like salivating on this thing. And then she's like, and it's no good, she says. And I'm like, it's no good. I said, this painting is 102 square feet in size. It's 7 by 15 feet. You have seen a 4 by 6 inch photograph of it on a computer screen, and you're telling me it's no good? You haven't even seen. How can you try to render a critique of a piece of a work of art of that scale by looking at a tiny image? It was, and she's now way up here, but this is how this conversation ended. She's like, I'm the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Your application will go no further. You can appeal it all you want. Click, like this. And that is how it ended. And I was stunned, Ricky. I was stunned. I stood there in silence. Like, I felt like I had been, I was abused. I felt like violated.
It's a
And
very surreal feeling.
powerless. I have great respect for authority. When that phone call came and it was her on the end of it, I stood up out of my chair. I was sitting down. I stood up. I wanted to show respect. I wanted to, you show deference. This is the director of the National Museum. It's like, oh my goodness, you have this posture of deference and great honor and respect. This is a serious call. But what I've learned in my life, sadly, is as you put yourself in a vulnerable position like that, you become susceptible to the deepest wounds, because it's like you're not guarding yourself. And as the conversation developed and became hostile, I began to protect myself. But she kept coming like this.
Yeah.
At the end of it, I was stunned, and I did feel violated. The beginning chapter of my book is called Power and Abuse, and it's how that experience launched me onto this journey. And when Kim said to me, you can appeal it all you want, she will regret it to this day that she ever said that, because I'm like, after I recovered after a few days, and it took me probably a week or 10 days to get my mind back, I'm like, appeal it? I'm going to appeal it. And I'm like, well, how do I do that? So I researched the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. I said, well, who's her boss? Who owns it? Who runs it? And guess what? I find the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution. And guess who sits on the board? Here we go.
Who's that?
Chief Justice John Roberts is the chancellor. The vice president of the United States at the time was Joe Biden. 3 members of Congress, 3 members of the Senate, and 9 members of the public. 17 very important people. So I'm going, okay, I'm going to appeal Kim Sayed now. And I draft this big appeal. I write everything she did. The one thing I did after she said what she said, within half an hour, I jotted down what went on. I thank God that I did this. So I had a very good record of what she said. I drafted this appeal, the application, all the letters from all the representatives that supported it, copies of the print, 17 big bundles, big fat manila envelopes with like a 60-page appeal. And I get 17 of them and I cart them into the post office and I slammed them down. I'm like, boom, 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 boom. I was sending these things off to the Smithsonian Institute. Chief Justice John Roberts, Vice President Joe Biden, send it off to all of them. Nothing happens for like 10 days, 2 weeks. And then I get a letter in the mail from the Smithsonian Institution. I'm like, oh, it's this. From a guy by the name of Dr. Richard Curran, not on the Board of Regents, but a big cheese in the Smithsonian Institution. And I open the letter and it's very short. And it says, Dear Mr. Raven, I can't remember right now. It's in my book. I think it's the the Chancellor or the Board of Regents forwarded me your letter. I basically agree with everything Kim Sayed said. Goodbye. And that was it. Yeah, that face, you see that face? That's the stunned look I had. So I was stunned. I've got the letter in the book. You can read it. I got a copy of the letter. And you're like, the title, the book is very funny. I had to make it funny because it's so tragic that you've got to have a laugh as you're suffering. The book title, that title is called Concurring Curran. That's the title of the name because the name of the chapter, because he blindly agrees now, in having been appointed by the Board of Regents to adjudicate my appeal. He replies like that. I am now shocked and outraged. And this is January 20th. It's coming fast. This is probably the end of December now. 20 days. And I've started losing hope. I'm like, man, this is not even going to happen. This is really discouraging. I'm really wrestling, getting discouraged, getting just angry. I'm like, oh, this is unreal. So then I'm like, what do I do now? How do I sue them? How do I appeal this even further? How do I go? And again, this is the learning of a citizen, a newborn citizen.
It's about when you became an American. It's like, listen, man, when you get as pissed off at them as we do, like that's, you become one of us at that point, because like there's no other surreal feeling in the world knowing that you didn't do anything wrong, but you're being accused of things that and you know that these things are objectively false. You know it in your body, in your soul, and your mind. You just know that these people are not correct for what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I've been through this situation a few times. Nothing as serious as that. Little trivial things here and there. But if I had an 8x15 painting that I had done and put as much feeling and thought into it as you did. And let me just let me just say this for the record, and for the viewers out there watching on YouTube or Spotify, we'll put up a picture of the painting at the bottom of the screen here for everyone to see. It is gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. Even if you take out the politicalness of it, which I don't really, especially right now with Donald Trump being president of the United States, it's not really political. It's American.
American, and that's yes. How I painted it. It's layered with symbols, American symbols, and it's a vision of hope. It's a surreal painting in that it's, when you look at it, it's a surreal vision. I was trying to paint what the statement "Make America Great Again" looks like. How do you graphically interpret that and it's a vision. It's a vision of a fading, inverted, torn flag that is yet part of this continuum of time and stretches out across the painting and goes up from it to heaven of where it initiated. In other words, and then it's serving as new stripes and new stars and new ink coming down in this vision to actually make a new flag, because the old one that's inverted and fluttering in space is fading and falling because it's disconnected from the flagpole that's cut off at the ropes at the end of the flag. So it's very deliberate in all of these symbols that it speaks, and that's when you stand in front of it, it's massive. It's awe-inspiring. It's when it was in L.A. at this political, it was an anti-Trump really art show. Everything was Trump was it was all I had the big anti-Trump blow up dolls as a rat and all this type of stuff. There were these, most of the other artwork was regular sized paintings, but they all look like cartoons because this monstrous painting, so sort of Trumpian in scale, is listen. It was in a conference center, so they built the walls, and the walls were only 8 feet tall, and the painting was sitting on the floor. It was stuck on the floor. You see the photos of it. It's like this huge. But that was the sort of that's the point. It's the power of this great big image, this person. And all of this contributes then to the, as you're rightly saying, the indignation. Like, hold on, listen, you can adjudicate my painting through standards. When she said to me, it's no good, my study has now obviously been for years in litigation that came. So I know the story intimately. The Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, when it was founded in the 60s, it says in its bylaws that this gallery is not like all other galleries. It's about it's about the history of the United States that has been made through individuals who have impacted the culture. And it's not about the artistic, it says in black and white, it's not about the artistic merit or the prominence of the artist. It's about the historicity of the subject. So to say that it's no good violated every other violation that she committed, because she's contradicting the very standards. If you look at the record at the Smithsonian of other Trump images that are there is like, I think there are now, there's maybe 5. I found them in the archives. There's a pen sketch. It looks like it was done on a napkin of Trump as a cartoon. Trump as Icarus with his wings made of dollar bills on fire falling from the sky, because it was representing a time with this man, Donald Trump, in New York collapses. He's would have all these bankruptcies. So it was an image depicting that guy at that time. That's what matters. And when you look at that, you say it's this tiny little pen sketch of this man, and you turn to me and say it's no good, and it's so wrong. It's so wrong on so many levels. So I'm at that point, Ricky, where I either say, well, I'm going to sue them, and I'm an artist living in the woods in Elmira, in the sticks in Elmira, New York. I have no resources to do this, sue the American government. But I'd found out about this story years ago. His name was Clarence Gideon. Did you ever see that movie? It's called Gideon's Trumpet. It's a great,
no.
It's a great film from I believe it's from the Lemmon. What was his name? Jack Lemmon, I think, plays it, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I'm very familiar with Jack Lemmon. He's hilarious.
But it might not have been him. I might have the actor mistaken. But this movie is called It's called Gideon's Trumpet. It's a true story of a guy that was arrested and convicted of theft, petty theft. He's in jail, and he appeals his conviction because they refused to give him a lawyer to help him. He was convicted, and he appealed by himself from jail all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they heard his case, and they assigned him a lawyer at the Supreme Court, and they vindicated his rights, and the law was changed, and this one little guy, a criminal in jail, to me, it was like a picture of this amazing city on a hill. Like I said, what a country, what a judicial system. And this is the thing with America. The system is amazing. It's just the people who are in power at the time determine how well that it functions. And at that
You're
time,
exactly right.
there were judges. Imagine that. This guy's in jail. He appeals to the US Supreme Court with his little typed out little petition, and they hear his case and they assign him a lawyer, and he wins. And he's vindicated and he's taken out of jail. I mean, it's amazing. So I knew that story, and I'm like, yeah, little Raven here. I'm this little guy in the woods, and I'm gonna sue America. I'm gonna sue this one. And I'm like, well, how do I do that? So I start fumbling, trying to work out how to do this. I had no resource. I had the internet. I had the means and the time as an artist. I had the time to do it. And I begin my journey. And I file in the wrong court. And I'm like, I get the court wrong, right? To start off with, I'm in the wrong court. In DC, there's like 15 different types of federal courts. And I get the wrong court. But the best thing happened, Ricky, after all this discouragement that I was in, very discouraging. It was very discouraging. I was like beaten down, and I'm like, I've got to do this. So I'm determined. The judge, Walski, his name was, once I realized I was in the wrong court, before he could dismiss my case, I motioned the court, and I said, whoops, I'm in the wrong court. And I said, please transfer my case to the district court. That's where it should be. And he replied back with one of the best letters I have had. It's in my story. It's in there, the best letters, where he writes and says, in order to transfer Mr. Raven's case, it has to have merit. He couldn't transfer a fictitious claim or some stupid case. He had to because he would be responsible to clogging up the docket probably with just junk, So
yes,
he said, Mr. Raven has made plausible claims. Mr. Raven has done this. And as a result, I'm transferring Mr. Raven's case to the district court as so ordered. And I read that. I was like, oh, this is great. This was like the happiest moment of my journey up until then. Little tiny win, because he said my case it wasn't frivolous. Yes. It had merit, and it was transferred. That takes me to the beginning of the big journey. In the book, I allegorize the journey. I write this parallel story of because the legal journey is very intense. There's a lot to read it, learn. And I said, my first time author in the sense of writing a book, I said, I need to be able to make the story entertaining so that there's lots of pictures in the book. I made sure it's a picture book. Most people pick it up. They're like, oh, great, there's pictures in it. So you can go through and see the pictures. But then I also said, I've got to make it palatable so that the common man like myself can make sense of this. And so I allegorize it. And it's called, it's basically, I'm climbing Mount Just Lords. It's this journey of this one man's ascent of this mountain. And so as I begin my lawsuit, I begin to allegorize it on a parallel site. One moment you're climbing this mountain and going up and all the trials and toils, and the next moment you're in court or in the docket and you're in the lawsuit and all this, and it goes through the whole book like that. So makes it much more interesting. And that whole other part of the journey is a profoundly important part for my life personally, as it was a transformative experience. The learning that I had to do and force myself. Listen, when I got letters from these judges and these courts, I was afraid. I would get a letter when I started suing. I get a big minute because who was defending Kim Sayed? It was the Department of Justice. So suddenly I get letters from the DOJ, and I'm like, oh my goodness, the Department of Justice.
I'm into it now.
And I'm like, I'd put it on my desk and I'd look at it for like 3 days. I wouldn't open it. I didn't dare. Yes. Because I knew I wouldn't understand what was in there. And I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I would peel open the envelope and begin to pull it out like this and read it under the desk. I was terrified, man, terrified of what was in there. Because not only was it like, again, you're dealing with the Department of Justice, but it was like, what in the world are they saying? Because I have no clue. So then it was the process of deciphering, learning. I basically went to law school by myself for 4 years, studying all this wonderful transformation, self-study, because you had to. Suing someone in federal court is extremely complex. It's not just the legal knowledge. It's then the laws of each particular court. They have very specific laws of how your work has to be and how you have to, and what size font and how many spaces. I mean, you're talking about detailed stuff. The good news is that as a pro se litigant, I represented myself. They do give latitude if you do botch something up. But in most of the time, I was able to hit the nail right on the head. I spent the time, I did the research, and I didn't get thrown off the docket once. My work was accepted. My work was, and so there's a lot. There's this, my docket. I punched that thing. I filled the docket. I had motions. I filed every type of motion I could so that I knew that the historical record of this case would have all of this issue.
Yes.
And I bring you back now to free speech, which becomes the cardinal issue of my case. And the question for you and for the American citizen listening is, what is the legal entity status of the Smithsonian Institution? Is it a federal agency or is it a private charitable trust? And do American citizens have free speech, First Amendment rights in the Smithsonian Institution? This is the question that has never been answered. This is the question that took my case all the way to the Supreme Court. They refuse to answer it because guess what? When it gets to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts is sitting right there. He's the chancellor of the Smithsonian. He recused himself. I have it all written down. The other judges are like, well, we don't want to deal with this. And I'm like, you don't want to deal with this? This is an unanswered question of federal law. It has never been answered. Nobody has ever sued the Smithsonian in this way and taken them to the Supreme Court. Nobody has ever asked this question. And as a result, my free speech rights have been trampled by this Australian woman. And in the district court, this is the bizarre part, the judge, a Trump-appointed judge, he was a brand new judge, he says, oh no, he says the Smithsonian Institution is the government through and through, like it's a federal agency. And this is the mystery, Ricky, that most Americans that I have spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot in 8 years, everybody that I've spoken to has got it wrong. And I have documentation since the very founding documents of the Smithsonian Institution by Joseph Henry, the first secretary of the Smithsonian. He wrote the vision statement for the institution. This is a private institution. It has nothing to do with the government. The government is merely a trustee. The federal government, Congress, accepted the bequest of James Smithson, a British man who gave his wealth and his fortune to the United States to form an institution in Washington, D.C. for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. It is a private charitable trust, like a church, like a 501c3. It is a private trust. The government's role is merely a trustee. That's it. There's no other thing. But over time, the corruption and the rot and the drift, people started, oh, we need to make appropriate.
I think it was designed that way, Julian. I really do. I think it was a place to hide shit. If you know what I'm getting at, the Smithsonian was probably it was probably at its inception a place to hide things.
Well, it's Joseph Henry was the first secretary. 37 years of his life he dedicated to this institution. A wonderful Christian man. He is America's first scientist. He was a man who revolutionized different industries in the design of electric motors. He is a remarkable man who was the first. So the Smithsonian's original intent was as it was designed, and especially by this man who was the secretary. He drove the bus, basically, and this is other details that are fascinating, that how that $515,000 of the bequest that at the time was probably about $80 million in those days. When that money arrived in Congress, they sat there for 10 years and they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to do anything with it. And then once they started the institution, they actually borrowed the money, and it's all in the founding documents. And they said, we're going to pay 6% interest on this loan. We're taking the money, and the Smithsonian Institution will function on the interest of the loan that we have borrowed. And it was never meant to have government appropriations. It was never meant to function with taxpayer money. It was always meant to function as a private bequest. That disappeared. If you go to smithsoninstitution.com, which is my website, not Smithsonian Institution, Smithson, which is name, I have it, smithsonianinstitution.com. You will see newspaper articles from the 1900s, 1927 in particular, from the Sunday Star in Washington, D.C., where they talk this wonderful story of the Smithsonian, but it is exactly the same issue. The article describes a family from the Midwest. It comes to them all in Washington. They see the White House, they see the Capitol, and they're, oh, the America, the government. Then they see the Smithsonian buildings, and they assume, it writes it right there, they assume this is the federal government. And the article says, but it's not. It's a private charity started with private funds, and it has nothing to do with the federal government. In
Well,
black and white from 19.
That's what they say about colleges and those type of institutions too, like Harvard and MIT and those types of institutions. NASA is a good a good example. NASA really started out as a space agency. They didn't start out as like taxpayer funded or anything like that. It was a space agency, and now they've made it to where NASA is semi-private, semi-government, so they can actually hide things within NASA. So a lot of information that NASA has and a lot of the data that they collect, we are not privy to because that's the private side. They contract with the military, and because they contract with the military, you won't even like if you deep dive into the Department of Defense budget holes, that's where a large chunk of it went, was NASA and space, related programs that nobody knows about. And that's
And it's
essentially how they
private. You
hide
can't
those.
get.
Yeah, it's
Well, it's
exactly.
and whether those are by design, in the Smithsonian case, it was a trust because it was a bequest. There was no other way. It's the
Or it
will. The
happened
will.
over time with probably happened like you're saying over time with corruption and people using different rules to suit themselves rather than the common good.
Well, that's exactly what happens to it, and you're spot on there because the documentation, even with the statements of William Howard Taft, who was president of the United States at that time, at the beginning of the 20th century, he's on record. I have him quoted multiple times when he says, because there were people trying to subvert the Smithsonian Institution, and he was then Chief Justice of the United States after he was president. And as Chief Justice, he was Chancellor of the Smithsonian Institution. So he is a huge authority, remarkable man. I have a whole chapter on him in my book. This is from humble beginnings. Incredible man, the incredible roles that he played in American politics. And the chapter is called American Taffy and American Taft, because he's just such a great story of just this simple guy that did so much, a really remarkable thing. But he stated in trying to push back against this issue of corruption and this issue of the funding and the monies, he said, no, the Smithsonian Institution is merely a trust, and the U.S. government is guardian of that trust. That's it. There's nothing. So it's all clearly documented. And later on in another chapter that I have, another part of my story was an amazing art show in Washington, D.C., where I was invited by these hardcore leftist Trump haters, art show, big time. And it was great because it was 100 yards from the National Portrait Gallery. It was the most ordained thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was remarkable. But this guy was, his name is Charles Krause. He's a former Washington Post journalist. Do you remember the massacre out in Guyana with Jim Jones?
Yes.
Remember that whole thing? He was a journalist for the Washington Post that flew over there with the congressman from California when they were all murdered on the runway, and like 3 people survived. He was one of the journalists who survived. Incredible story. He was shot. He lay there pretending to be dead on the runway, all these dead people around him. The congressman was murdered. It was really serious stuff. But he survived, and I got to meet him. He had this art show. He was a complete, it was a hardcore clash of artistic expression. On one side, it was complete hatred. The other side, it was this tribute. It was really something. It's great, great, great conversation, great dialogue. respectful. I went there saying, listen, I'm not this. I love you. I love people. You have a different opinion to me. It's fine. With people, we're working stuff out. Let's talk. Let's break bread. I said, at that time, there were all these people that were chasing people out of restaurants and all this hostility. I said, we have an opportunity to be, and they were surprised. They were expecting some, I think in their mind, they think, it's going to be some Trumper and he's going to be some bigot and all this. I said, this is not who I am. I said, I want to talk. I want to listen. I want to learn and understand where you're coming from. And I want you to hear my story. And we shake hands and we break bread at the end of it and see you at the ballot box. That to me is how the American system should work. And so we had a lot of that, but it was very, very interesting how this man and how his approach, obviously, to my artwork at that time was instrumental in this next stage of my journey. But he, the entity status issue of the Smithsonian, he had researched as a Washington Post journalist. He said to me, he says, listen, I was on task as the staff writer for the Washington Post, 1976. I said, I was a 6-year-old boy. I was playing on the beach of Spain, and here's Charles Krause investigating the Smithsonian Institution. He says, I wrote 12 investigative articles, and by the 12th one, the director or the editor of the magazine paper called me up to his office, and he says, that's enough. You're not allowed to do anymore. So they had called him. This is a sort of power structure. They called the Washington Post and shut down the investigation, believe it or not. That's what he said. It was remarkable. But he uncovered these corporations that at that time, the Smithsonian Institution was creating private corporations that they were transferring taxpayer appropriations into, and they were slush funds. They were laundering taxpayer money, as you said before, making it disappear. They made this, it was such a scandal. One of the many scandals also documented in my book. So what the issue that we get back to, which is this entity status of the Smithsonian Institution and free speech rights. Fast forward now to what happened this last month, which is the best news for me on my journey, which is on May 30th, the President of the United States fired Kim Sayed. It's national news. The Washington Post calls me up and says, Mr. Raven, we know your story is number 4 on the president's list of 17 reasons to fire Kim Sayed. It's on the list in the White House. Julian Raven's Trump painting, Unafraid and Unashamed. This woman, this Australian non-citizen, we want to, well, he didn't have the legal right to fire her. I said it in the article. I said, it's great that he's trying to do this, but he can't fire her. It's a private charity. And so then the Board of Regents meets, and they in DC. I go to DC. This is just 3 weeks ago. I have a press conference right on the same day. And I said, they're going to make this woman resign because they know now there's funding threats coming from the president that'll come through Congress. And they basically were like, yeah, this is what and I said in the article, I said, this is what they're going to do. They'll force her to resign. The Smithsonian, this is where the contradiction that is now present before the Supreme Court. Right now, as we speak, I have an emergency petition for rehearing of my case, which they rejected because the president of the United States tried to fire her. They said he couldn't fire her. They said, we are an independent institution. The secretary came out in a statement. The Smithsonian is an independent entity. The federal government has no power over us. This is what he said. And so I said, here's the statement of the Smithsonian secretary. And they know because the Chief Justice was there. And here's what Judge Trevor McFadden said in my case when he said the Smithsonian Institution is the government through and through. And I said, these two things cannot both be true at the same time. They cannot be. It cannot be an independent private entity and at the same time be the voice of the federal government, because they know the way that they silence my free speech rights. Judge Trevor McFadden ruled the Smithsonian Institution is the government through and through, and the Smithsonian Institution is exercising government speech. What Sayed did to you, he said, was odious, was partisan, but it was legal because it was government speech. And Mr. Raven, you have no First Amendment free speech rights. And I said, this is baloney, this is nonsense. And yet they will come out and say, well, we're an independent organization. I said, that's what they are. And I have full free speech rights there because it has a government-created board of regents. All the lawsuits that I cited all defended my everything was on my side, except the status quo bias in the city of Washington, D.C. And they denied me the free speech rights that I swore that oath to defend. and as precious to me, one of the most remarkable gifts that America has given to Americans and to the world. And this gift that we have, and they stripped it from me by twist because of politics and because of prestige and the institution. Oh my goodness, we've got to defend this woman. And then they come out and fire her 8 years later because the president says she's highly partisan. But he quoted my case, number 4 on his list of 17 reasons to fire her. And then she resigned 2 weeks ago and she's gone. And now the question is even louder. She resigned. They didn't resolve the question. Everything wants to go quiet. But now my case is sitting before the U.S. Supreme Court as we speak. And maybe they kick me to the curb again. This is my 3rd petition to them. Maybe this time they're going to say, you know what, we got to solve this once and for all. And we got to make a ruling because the president has spoken. That may be the case.
Man, I just don't know how they get away with stuff like that. But with saying that they are the government through and through, and we're a private entity, basically the Smithsonian Institutes don't have rules. That's essentially
well, they do,
saying.
they do. It's very clear, Ricky. It's very clear. It's black and white clear. The problem is, nobody has ruled on it at the highest level of the justice system to declare to the public, this is what it means. This is what that great case, which is Madison versus Marbury, the great constitutional case where you had this conflict in the different parts of the government. And the Supreme Court came out and said, this is the province of the judicial to say what the law is. It is, and I quote that, and I say to them, I said, your job is to say what the law is. You can no longer, because all of the articles around the question, when the president tried to fire her, all these newspaper articles, well, can he fire her? Nobody knows. Can he do it? And then the Smithsonian comes out and says, we're a private entity. We are in control of firing and hiring. And so you're like, so no one pushed back, no media pushed back on that. The media is so eager to defend them that they're like, oh, they said they're in control. Well, we'll just believe them instead of saying, well, hold on a second. What does the Supreme Court say about this? Well, that's Raven's case, and they won't take Raven's case because Raven's case is pointing to them now, saying you failed in your own duty to answer this unanswered question of federal law. What an outrage. What an absolute outrage. And I hope one day, maybe in my lifetime, maybe my kid's life, I don't know. But I'm waiting for that day. I'm going to hear those words. And I'm going to say, you know what, Mr. Raven, you were right after all. You were right after all. And maybe you're sorry. And maybe compensation comes at that time, because this is 10 years of my life nearly. And the ridicule that I've experienced, and the mockery, and the slander, even in the media, the mockery. He's trying to force his way into the Smithsonian. They mocked it in all the art world. They mocked it. My story's all over the place. And I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? I went in good faith. I was just like, respectful. I didn't do anything. It was nothing out of order. And this is what happened to me. And you're defending them. You're defending her. It's an absolute outrage. Only the Washington Post, Maura Judkis, wrote an honest, balanced story and included me. They interviewed me, and she even was the only journalist in hundreds to say, Mr. Raven raises a good question. What is the Smithsonian Institution? And that's in that article. And that was, when I saw that, I said, that is golden, because the respect given to this newspaper now, and it's printed, it was in the printed edition. I have the copies, but they now have echoed that question. And it's been echoed in lots of other media throughout the years. This was the most important thing at the time when the president spoke. Maybe by the grace of God, this is the time for vindication. And, when you say, the need, or we look at the need of our institutions, this can be, as the spirit of reform has come into the country, and they're poking at all these different places. They're trying to poke in all the corners, and good. Let this be one of them, because it holds such a powerful place in the minds of Americans that the people that have hijacked an institution, they have used it knowing full well its persuasive power to enforce their agenda. And they've used it to manipulate, because they have this huge respect it's like, oh, the Smithsonian said it must be true, and all this. And they know what they're doing. These are smart people. They're not stupid. They're smart. They are mischievous. They're devious people. And I pray that the light is going to shine and that we're going to say, hey, you know what? We got him. And we're going to see reform come to that institution. That would be huge.
I think there's going to be reform all over the place, and I think for me, I think that's ultimately why I'm entertaining a lot of the bullshit that happens politically right now. Like right now, I don't agree with everything. Um, I, there's a vision that I have at the end of the tunnel. You know, America comes out of this. You know, we're not going to come out of it unscathed. Obviously not. We've got decades of policy that we have to reverse, and if we can't reverse, we ultimately have to come up with a better way,
Mm-hmm.
because the way we've been doing things is not working, and it makes it 10 times worse that society now has made. I hate identity politics. I absolutely hate identity politics. I don't like labeling people MAGA. I don't like labeling people leftist,
Sure.
or and unless they're self-proclaimed. You know, what I like to label people as is people.
Mm.
We all have different opinions, and you know, mine's going to be different than yours, and yours is going to be different than hers, and hers is going to be different than that guy's. It
And
for
that's
me,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. For me, that is okay. We
Yeah.
all have to figure out how to work on this together.
Right.
And if we
Right.
individualize politics, nobody's right. You
Yeah.
know, no, it's like that song says, nobody's right if everybody's wrong,
Mm.
you know? And we all have to come together and figure this thing out. And I think that we're eventually, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I
Yep.
think eventually it's going to crack open and people are going to get tired of it, because we now see the side effects of using, like you're alluding to, the system, to using the system against our enemies, quote unquote. It's using pride and privilege, using whatever means you have to do to take down the other person.
Mhm.
We see that a lot, and
Mhm.
it's not getting any
From
better.
both sides. Yeah, from both
Yes.
sides. It's just it's vile. Yeah, it's like just stick to the rules. Stick to the rules. Follow the law. It's a good law. That's the thing. That's what makes it crazy. It's we have an amazing system,
Yes.
and it's and if we just stick to the system, yeah, if you lose, you lose. Go back and try it another way, and come back and see at the ballot box. That's how I was brought up, even as an Englishman living in Spain. It's like the one thing I remember my mother saying is, "Oh yeah, the House of Commons in England. They'd go down, they get up there, and they yell at each other. And, oh, rhubarb, rhubarb, rhubarb! It's quite a spectacle when you see them going at it. But then they go out and they go down to the pub together. They have a pint of lager, a pint of Guinness, and they sit there and they're laughing and it's like that's a great system.
Yes.
That's what we need, that type of respect. But unfortunately, we are way past that. It's like it's not impossible, but when I've experienced, and I can only take the sort of my little litmus test of life and my experience, and you put it in there, it's like that's like this is not good. But I am an optimistic person, as much as I've been discouraged over the years and depressed and just downtrodden and just like so just like I guess out of here. Right now, I'm very optimistic that maybe something positive can come from it. And what a great thing to be able to model that as an example to citizens. Say, listen, we can do this. The little guy on the street, you can do it. It's going to be
Yeah.
hard. It's going to hurt. But what did they pay to win America? What type of sacrifice did they? What type of suffering?
Yes.
What type of
Yes.
America
Thank
was
you,
born in?
Julian.
You know.
Thank you. I've been preaching that for months. I'm like, this is going to hurt like hell. It really is. It's going to hurt like hell, especially financially, and especially for those under a certain income limit. It's going to hurt like hell. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And some of these systems were put in place for things that we don't worry about anymore. It's, you know what I mean? It's um uh the well, USAID is a good example of things that we don't use properly. It was put in place for a catch-all for um, basically any aid that happens outside of the United States, whether it be trying to grease one's pockets, or trying to buy a politician over here or
Mhm.
buy a politician over there. That's essentially what it was made for. And people kind of forgot that. And when Elon Musk and everybody was trying to tear down USAID and all that, they brought out all these things that USAID is funding. And those are just labels that they're putting on things. That's not where the money is actually going. They're using that as a soft power trap. And essentially they load up this budget so that they can go over here and make things happen without
Mm,
actually saying what they're doing.
they're doing.
And yeah, for me, it's if they were honest about stuff, for the war in Ukraine, if they were honest about that from the very beginning, if they come out and told the American people, like, "Hey, we're trying to weaken Russia, and we need your help. We need you to fund this." If they did that, they'd get funding. They absolutely would. There'd be enough Americans that'd been like, "Yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that," and it's all if there was honesty, accountability.
Oh,
Accountability is a big one that nobody's held
oh,
accountable for anything.
oh.
Accountability is a big one. If there was honesty, accountability, responsibility, and if everybody was held to a certain standard, we'd be a lot better off. We would be a lot better. And if they'd stop hiding agendas, if they'd come to us and be like, we need this to start a war over here, you'd be surprised at how many people would actually fund that.
It's always the way, though. They try to sell their idea in the most sellable way possible, and that's what
Yeah.
they end up doing. And that, what you say about the common standards there. I remember the speech that George Washington gave when he left, his departing speech. I think that's one of the most remarkable political moments in history when this former president, says, "It's all right, it's done. I'm going back to my farm." And he gets on his horse and rides away. I mean, it's so wonderful. The world's around him is like, "What's wrong with you? You're giving up your throne," and you're like, "Yep, I'm done. I'm going to go back." And this is the American system. Well, he warns in that speech that he gives. He warns about that, and yet when he speaks to the different sides of the fractious political situation, even then he says, we all have like a similar religion. In other words, this goes back to the common values. And as a preacher of the gospel, I came to the US as a missionary. I was going to South America as part of my journey. My primary calling, is like I'm a preacher of the gospel. And the fundamental idea, which you just stated, is exactly right. You see, we can have all this latitude for difference, all this latitude for disagreement, all this latitude for, whether it's positive or negative or whatever it is, we can have a lot of room for this, but underneath it, we have to have some guardrails
Yeah.
that are our standards that are inviolable, that they are, they're transcendental. They come from another realm. They're not man-made, they're God-made. And this is my perspective, because that then protects us where we can then play on the field, see at the ballot box. But what's happened in the last 20, 30, 40 years is that those standards have been eroded to the point where now the different political sides, there's some places have no standards. It's like it's anything goes. And John Adams said, and I wrote about this in my book. He's one of my favorite founders, along with Jefferson, and what some remarkable people at that time, and their thinking was remarkable. But he said that our Constitution was made solely for a moral and religious people. And he says it is wholly inadequate for the governing of any other people. And so once we lose that, the self-restraint that God wants us to each have in our own lives, police ourselves, our values, and have those standards, the Constitution is only a license for madness. And it's that's what we're seeing now. We are seeing that as completely the destruction and the implosion of society because the standards have been tossed out. And what do we do? I see stuff today on the internet that's just like, I can't. The behavior of people, they go from 0 to 100 in less than a second of rage,
Yeah.
and you're like, whoa! It's like no
Well,
decency,
we
no
don't even
nothing.
look at it as each other as people anymore. It's one of those things where on being on the internet and social media has made people
Oh,
it's made people too comfortable with insulting each other. And there's a lot of people that say it, but it has made people not afraid to be punched in the face, for what they say. And it used to be back in the day, that's how you used to solve things. Like if I didn't like, something that somebody said, if it was fighting words, we'd go at it. That's how we
sure,
solved that.
sure.
And nowadays it's like the insults, it's the ad hominem attacks.
Yeah, yeah.
They can't come up with a good argument against what you're saying, so they attack you, and it's gross. It is
It
really
is. It
gross.
is. It is. Yeah. Because it's just each time you do that, you're betraying these wonderful, beautiful ideas that we stand upon. It's like,
Yes.
don't you see what this is the point? He says, don't you see what we have? Don't you see it? And it's like, even if we don't have it, even if you don't have that, that the peace that maybe you want and you're struggling, we all have hardships and struggle. Everybody, nobody is exempt. It's living with the vision that should drive us. This the dream, that idea,
Yeah.
that marvelous opportunity that the rest of the world doesn't have, but
Yes.
people can't see it. They cannot see it's they can't see it. And so it is tragic, and yet there is always hope while our heart beats. There's always hope for
Yes.
faith and for hearts to be changed. And that's where I am like, yep, at the end of the day, that's where I'll say. And preach the everlasting gospel. It's the only mechanism that changes human hearts. And maybe, who knows? That's my perspective. And that's where I come from, bringing my
Absolutely.
my faith.
Absolutely. And you could preach on, brother. I'm not religious by any means. I don't go to church or anything like that.
I don't go either.
I believe, but I absolutely see a religious resurgence here in the United States like I've never seen before. I'm seeing young people talking about gospel. I'm seeing older people going back to church. I'm seeing people get back to grassroots and doing things that we got away from family,
Yeah.
and I think we're trying to recenter ourselves back to a family centric style here in the United States, especially here in the Midwest. We love families here in the Midwest. There's a lot of big
Mm,
families here.
mm,
But I'd like to shift gears a little bit. I've only got a little bit of time left.
mm,
I wanted to talk a little bit about the mayoral race in New York City. As
mm.
we're talking about all these things, it kind of gets me like it kind of makes me giggle a little bit if it wasn't so serious. About like at first we were kind of dealing with you know Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom going back and forth.
Mm.
Then it was Donald Trump and Elon Musk going back and forth. And now it is the incumbent mayor of New York and the new mayors that are trying to, Cuomo and Mandani. I can't remember if that's how you say his name. I was just curious, like, is it everywhere, like politics, like right now, is it everywhere in New York, or is it just like the mayoral race centered in New York City and not many people outside of there are paying attention to
Yeah. Upstate doesn't care. Upstate, we're a different country up here.
it?
They do not care. There's New York State, New York City, and this is like, parts of Texas and states, upstate New York. There's been a drive for years, cold and hot, to secede from the state, to split the state. New York City is a different animal down there. Obviously, I read the news. I follow the news as closely as I can, and to find out about it. I think it's a sort of an inevitable direction that the country will take, because when you present ideas, I grew up in Spain. I just was living in Spain for the last year and a half. I grew up in Marbella, Spain, and Spain has been a socialist country. It was a communist country in the 40s and 50s. They had the Civil War. Then it came out of communism, and when it went into with Franco, and then it went to sort of hard right, and then got a monarchy back. And so politically, it's still a socialist because it has a socialist government, but they've always been trying to change that. And there's a lot of influence now, outside influence, American influence. So there's a lot of change that's happened. But what I learned, being there again with fresh eyes, seeing this place where I grew up, once again, is that, you know, the socialist ideas, communist ideas, a lot of them are very good. They sound very good. They sound very good. And so in Spain, they're so used to that mindset that they don't think in any other way in general. They're always looking for the government to be there. The government's going to do this, and I'm going to get my payment. I'm going to get my apartment. The government's going to provide this. It's just part of the way it is. And you know, there's a lot of virtue in a lot of the ideas that it presents, because you know, if you're going to really take care of the poor and you're really going to take care of the needy and all of you're really going to do that, good. That's a good thing. The problems with it, we know history has said, yeah, but it's not a system that's viable because of what happens. It just ends up in this certain way. So when somebody now comes to New York City and says, well, you know, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that, have these different ideas, you're like, well, the country now is in a perfect place for that to be appealing, because there's huge disparity. There is genuine economic suffering. I don't think, you see, what I learned about Spaniards, and I was really careful to look at it this last year and I have to try and understand, you know, Spain is a remarkable country, ancient country, beautiful people, beautiful culture, beautiful food, wine, you know, it's a beautiful country, but it's a very frustrated country. You know, the Spaniard has learned that he is powerless to have any impact on his nation, his government, nothing. So they've masterfully developed this whole cultural way of celebrating where they're just like, we don't care, there's nothing we can do, so we're just going to have a good time. And they have a really good time, you know, it's just what they do. So you know, when you think of that and say, well, you know, they've managed to survive in this system and they live this, they're happy, there's a lot of happiness, but it's a lot of frustration, simple living. There's a lot of, you can say, oh, it's nice, it's a nice thing, but when you get to the core of it, you start talking to the Spaniard, before long, you pluck the cords. It's just this frustration, impotence, and powerlessness that comes with the system because they just feel that. Whereas, you know, I love America because it gives the individual this, what I'm doing. I can get up and say, well, I'm going to try and do something about it. And there's a means, and the system helps me. It's amazing. It's just so different. So when you see this coming at the time where the economic disparity happens, and I was like, you know, the pursuit of happiness is a wonderful objective to put in a legal document for a people. It's wonderful. But I think that what it does to people, especially in today's, like, people are exposed to so much wealth of other people on this, it creates this thing with some people. It's as if they can't get to anywhere where they're getting what they want. And there's such frustration there. And they overburden themselves with debt, and they think they got to live like this, and they got to have this type of car, and they got to have this type of house, and they have to
talk about this.
And the media is pushing and pushing, and they're these simple people, and they're like, it's a pursuit of happiness. This is going to make me happy, and it doesn't, because when you go to Spain, there's one thing you learn is that the average Spaniard is very, you know, they're powerless economically compared to Americans, but they're happy. You go out at night, you go to a restaurant, and they're chatting and they're cheering their football and they're drinking their wine and they're eating their good food, and it's wonderful. And they've managed to find this way of being happy. And it's as if they have resolved that they are content with that, because the drive or the opportunity to have more like America offers, it's not there. The means, you know, to be self-employed in Spain, you have to pay about $350 a month as a tax as like a permission to be self-employed. So that decimates entrepreneurial spirit. That just, like most people, and then it causes corruption because they're like, I'm just going to work under the table. And it's this terrible self-inflicting, you know, it's just very terrible. But then now you look at New York City, there's all this there's this huge wealth. And then there's all these millions of people that are just like working 3 jobs and trying to get, and the guy comes on and says, we're going to distribute this, or we're going to make it like, and then it's like, ha ha, Nirvana has come. You know? It's appealing. It's really appealing. And they don't realize is that someone somewhere, not them, is going to pay for it. And that's right. The problem. As Margaret Thatcher says, you know, the only problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And it's like, that's that's the poison that they think is so wonderful, because he's saying all these wonderful things. But yeah, you know what? He got to get that money from somewhere. So
Yes, yes, and that was
madness.
kind of where I was going with that. Is everything I do think it swings in like a pendulum, but I used to say things like so. I used to say things like I must have made it look too easy for my kids, and what I mean by that is my 21-year-old son, who recently just moved out within a year ago. Maybe it's been almost two now. But when he first moved out, he had to have a big 65-inch TV, nice furniture. And I'm like, how are you going to pay for all this, son? Oh, yeah, I got a job. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, okay, well, hear me out. But you're also going to have lots of other bills that you have to pay that there aren't an option, or you're not going to have electricity.
Yeah.
And explaining these things to him, it was like he didn't get it. He didn't understand that those bills are going to roll in every month. And I asked him one time, I said, did I make it look easy, for you looking on the outside, looking in, when you see that we always had our lights on, when you see that, we didn't always have cable, but we always had internet. And
Mhm.
um, did we were going on vacations, we were doing did we make it look easy to you? He's like, well, yeah. And I was like, now that you move out on your own, are you seeing that it's not as easy as what you thought? He's like, oh yeah, it's not near as cheap as what I thought it was. And I said, can you afford, because he's 21 years old and I still pay his phone bill. And
Mm.
he doesn't live with me, and I asked him, I was like, what would you do if I didn't pay your phone bill? He's like, well, some months I probably have to go without a phone. And I was
Mm.
like, when I was 21, I didn't have a phone. I didn't
Yeah.
have a cell. They were available, but I didn't
Didn't need
have
it.
one.
Yeah.
I didn't need it. And
Mm.
we didn't have cable, when I was 21, 22 years. I didn't get cable till I was like 30, you know? And then it was just so I could watch my football. But it one of those things that I the kid expected to start out there when he moved out. There
Mm.
was no struggle. There was no start here, move there. There was none of that. There was no hope. There was no there was not even a motivation for upward mobility, you
Mm.
know? And I had to explain to him, you start out in entry level positions, you get entry level pay, and then you just move up from scale up from there until you make
Mm.
enough money where you can buy your own equipment, buy your own tools, and then you just work for yourself.
Mm.
And that works here in the United States. It doesn't work
It does.
everywhere around the world.
Yep.
And I've looked back, and I think when I said those things to him, I was like, well, that's partially my fault for making it look so easy. And nowadays we're doing things differently. We haven't bought a loaf of bread in almost a year, and we make our own bread here at home.
Mm.
We are stopping the consumerism here
Sure.
in our house. We're not buying
Sure.
cheap Chinese junk. We're trying to buy homemade, like handmade, quality American crafted stuff.
Sure.
Like this table behind me. It looks like a piece of shit because it is a piece of shit. I bought that for $200 from China. And if I paid just a couple $100 more, I could have a nice, elaborate, heavy actual wood table that was crafted here in the United States. And I look at these things, I'm not going to have that table much longer because it's falling apart and stuff.
Sure.
But if I spent a couple hundred extra dollars and bought an American table from an American maker, it's going to cost me a little bit, but I'll have it for the rest of my life and I'll be able to pass it on to my kids.
Hmm.
That stuff used to happen. You used to buy one piece of furniture in your
For that.
20s
Yep. Yep.
and then you pass it on when you die.
Yep.
And those are the days that I miss. And so we're trying to do things a little bit differently here at the house. It's not homesteading per se because we live in the middle of a city,
Hmm.
but we're trying to be more self sufficient and try not to depend on the grocery store so much. Try not to depend on electricity so much, have everything prepared, be prepared in the wintertime, be prepared in the summertime. And ultimately, it's helping my kids understand that even when bad stuff happens, that doesn't mean that life gets to stop. That means
Sure.
you just may have to readjust and keep going.
Keep
Um,
going.
it's not that we can't afford bread. It's that, homemade bread's a little better for you. It's a
Oh
lot
yeah.
cheaper. It's a
Oh
lot
yeah.
cheaper. We got it down to like $1 a loaf now. So
Oh wow.
it's we like here's another great, like, people love pizza. Americans love pizza. We love pizza. It's a huge thing in New York, but pizza's really expensive. If you go to Pizza Hut, it's like almost $20 for like a
Sure.
large pizza
For a
now.
pint. Yep. Yep. Yep.
And we can make two large pizzas at home with homemade dough, homemade sauce, and everything. We can get the price down to less than $5 a pizza
A
if we
piece.
make
Yeah.
it at home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's how these folks are making money. You realize that, and that's an interesting point about bread. Is with Spain, it's one of the major things that I miss because they have wonderful bread, and the prices in Spain, the cost of living is much cheaper. Bread is like the prices that you're talking about, very, very, very cheap, fresh, and it came back here, and I'm like, oh, I had a sandwich the other day at Subway with my son, and I'm like, I'm not eating there again. I refuse to go and eat that bread. I cannot. That's like a crime. I said it was like I
Yes.
said, listen, there are places in Spain they have frozen bread and they cook it in the oven, but it comes out like a real loaf of bread. I don't know what
Yes.
that stuff is at this thing. So, but that my wife had even said maybe we should make our own. So that's encouraging to hear you're doing it because I might look into that a little further because I miss the bread. Yesterday I was in Wegmans, which is down the street from us, a store, and I'm looking at the prices, and I looked at a little seeded loaf, like a really healthy looking loaf of bread. It was $6.50, and I'm like, wow, it's $3.50 for a baguette. A baguette
Yes.
of bread, a French baguette. It's just like this, $3.50. I'm like, whoa! It's like it's a whole different ball game. But I think I will look into that, and I'm glad that you shared it because it's not that difficult. I know that we've done it. My wife used to make here years ago Amish bread. That's called friendship bread. The Amish do.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
you're familiar with that, we used to
Yes.
do that. Was great. Not really bread. It was more like a sweet cake sort of thing. But it definitely is something that I would consider now because you're making me hungry, you're making me think of good Spanish bread, and you're making me say, hey, you know what? I think it's a really good idea because it's attainable. And,
Yes.
if it makes us happy, it's another little ingredient that's not out of order. You don't have to have super elaborate stuff. You can make maybe some bread and make yourself a little bit happier because fresh bread is really good. I think I'm going
Yes.
to go down that road. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes, I mean, it's so much better than you get at the store. Like you're mentioning about bread in Spain. It's fresh, like right out of the oven. You slice it up and then you
Oh, man.
slap some butter or some jam on it. There's nothing better. But
I'm
my
drooling.
wife, my wife who
It's like
makes it,
spit going everywhere when I'm seeing that.
my wife who makes it, she says it's so cathartic and therapeutic to make the bread now. And
Mhm.
so just even when we have bread, because we don't really eat bread that much, even when we do have it, she's making bread for family members,
Mm,
for friends, and she's just giving away the loaves of bread because
the bread.
she loves it so much.
Mm.
And we've started making our jerkies at home now, like because I got tired of buying jerky. And here's I cannabis is legal here in Missouri, and I'm getting ready to start growing my own cannabis because it's a better product than what you can buy in the store.
By the stores.
And so I think by doing these things the hard way, I'm going to end up teaching my kids that yes, it may be a little bit more laborious, but it's actually definitely worth it in the end.
Yeah.
Because my 15-year-old, he's like, I don't want to ever buy another loaf of bread from the store now that he has homemade bread and homemade pizzas. And I tell
Doesn't
you what,
compare to see.
no, it doesn't. It's so fresh and so
Mm.
available. And a lot of people don't understand, like, you go to the store after. So here in the Midwest, we have, like freaky winter storms where it's just warm enough for storms to roll in and snow start falling. and then it kind of melts a little bit, and then it gets slick on the streets, and then it gets really, really cold. So it's hell. But anyway, I
Freezes. Yeah, it
mean,
sounds like New
yeah,
York.
yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
But so right before a winter storm, you go to the grocery store and there's nothing on the shelves. There's, everybody's cleared the whole place out. Well, that can be avoided if you knew how to make your own stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, there's a lot of wisdom behind that. There's a lot of wisdom. And again, it's about people prioritizing what they do with their lives, or they're chasing, running. It's like, say, well, what do you just can do with less? My wife and I RV'd for like 2.5 years. It's like 20 after COVID, like for 2.5 years. And we're like in 200 square feet in an RV. And I'm like, I am so happy in a small space. I do not
Yes.
need anything. I just need this. I need this. Now, my art studio is a different matter. I'm in my art studio. It's a large space in upstate New York, very affordable. And I'm a large format painter. This is my creative space where it's like I'm a kid in my little world here. It's wonderful, and I need space. That's what I do as a creative person. But my living space just basically is a bed, and it's very very. We have tailored. So when you again, it's this pressure that people are under. People are so manipulated by this pressure to buy or to have, or like you said, your son, you got to
Yes.
have this big TV or this or this, and it's like saying, guess what? You don't need any of that. You just
Yeah.
need good. You mentioned the Midwest for families, and going back to those are the things that make life really valuable. Beautiful family relationships,
Yes.
good bread, good wine, fellowship, good conversation, meeting of the minds, learning to love your neighbor. I mean, that's like on this planet. That's so rich. You're so rich if you can have that. And in America, we can. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. And with that, Julian, I think that's a good place to leave this conversation. But I'd like to reach out to you again in the future because I want I want to hear all your stories, man. You're such a great storyteller, and I can just imagine how great your book is going to be. I'm going to get it and I'm going to read it
Good.
because I'm so intrigued by this story as well. It's so I've had stuff like this happen to me, not near as as detailed as yours is, because it was one of those things where I just kind of it happens, and I'm just like, well, okay, I got to figure out something else because they're not going to
Sure.
let me do this. So I'm very proud that you took this to Supreme Court. I'm very proud that you're seeking out those answers, and it's not just for you, it's for all of us. And
Oh, right. It's for the next artist that goes there. It's like that's the point. It's like, come on. It's like, what are you going to do the same to the next guy, ruin
yes.
his life?
Yes, and let's just say it's another like Obama like photo,
Yeah.
and truth be told, I voted for Obama twice.
Mm,
So I also voted for Trump, but I voted for Obama twice.
sure.
And it's you're absolutely right. What if this happens to somebody else? And that I appreciate that from one American to another. Thank you very much, man.
Praise God, man. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to the next time. Maybe we'll speak when I get the response from the Supreme Court. If that happens and it's good, then because if it's not, I'll be just like, ah.
Hey, man, just jump on here, send me a message, and if it's negative or positive, if it's negative, I'll help you feel better.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
No problem, Julian, and thank you again for coming on the show and hanging out with us and telling your story. And I can't wait to have you on again.
Wonderful, Ricky. Thank you. Have a great day, man. God bless.
You too. See ya.